Hey everyone, welcome to the GitHub Masterclass. In this lecture, we are going to look at what are some cool GitHub repos and tools. So you might be wondering what is this robot doing here and what does this ship handle is doing here. So basically, this is an open source tool known as Godot, and this is known as an open source tool, Kubernetes. So why it's so cool and why people are why Godot and Kubernetes is making noise. So now basically let us first check what is Godot. So if you come to github.com and github.com and if you search for Godot, here you could find a Godot engine, that is Godot. And basically what Godot is, basically it's a game engine which is used to render 2D and 3D games. And basically, why it's gaining so much traction? So, the popular game engine that are used for game development, such as Unity and Unreal Engine, have recently announced that they will hike the royalty cost. That after 100k, you have to give certain amount to the Unity, and it's like people considering it to be a thief because developers are working so hard to build their game, and then when they are having profit they have to give much of the money to the Unity company, and if you are building on Unreal you need to give it to the Unreal Engine. So that's why people started Godot game engine, where community came together and build this open source platform which is used to render 2D and 3D games. Basically, it's different from all other game engine. It uses node reference to build game, and it's why it's famous because it's open source. So if you want to change something, you have the code. You could understand the code, and once you got the code, you could change their code based on your reference. And basically, it's free, open source, and community driven. It's maintained and developed by uh, open source community. So if you want to develop and contribute to the Godot engine, you could go to their community and start driving into it. And that is why the reason why, just to recover why Godot have been gaining popularity, because it's open source and it doesn't take any royalties, no string attached, no royalties, nothing. The user the user games are theirs down to the last line of the engine code. Godot in development is fully independent and community driven, empowering user to shape their engine to match their expectation. It is supported by Godot Foundation for non-for-profit community. And here you could see people have built their game. It's basically a node-based game. You could see here one node, but you don't have to consider know about it. Basically, you know to know that why it's gaining popularity. Now let us look at the next ship type thing. So you might be wondering what is this? Basically, this is Kubernetes. And what is Kubernetes? Kubernetes is an open source software where it is used to manage lot of containers. Basically, Docker container you could manage through Kubernetes. So now let us open the Kubernetes. So you go to, and basically just to revise, you could see how many star it is. It's one of the most popular uh, repository in uh, GitHub, 89.9k, which is huge, and lot of people have forked it. So other thing we could do is basically go to Kubernetes. So here you could see production grade container scheduling and management, which is used to manage and containerize the which is used to manage and containerize your application. Basically, Kubernetes was built by Google, and the reason why it was built and developed by Google, basically in late 2012 and 16 it was used by Google basically for their internal tooling, and they faced an issue because they have a lot of Docker container, and suppose one of the or a container got not working, they have to look individually. So they created a Kubernetes, which is built on Go, and Go is also a open source programming language which is built by Google for building binaries, and it's the binary is highly efficient, like it's almost compared to the Rust. So you could see that Kubernetes built upon a decade and half of Google experience at Google running production workload at scale using system called Bok, which combined with the best of breed ideas and practice from the community. Kubernetes is hosted by Cloud Native Computing Foundation. If you want to shape the evolution, they are container packaged, dynamically scheduled, microservices. Consider joining the CNCF. Next, they Google open source their tool Kubernetes in late 2018-19, and people start using it for their deployment, and you could easily manage all those container, and you could have an idea. It also it is it works as infrastructure as a code. So once you have employed, you could easily deploy your Kubernetes containers with all the backend running on those container, and these container have a master container that contains all those smaller nodes. So you could start building upon Kubernetes. They have their documentation how you could start on this. You could see if you know what how Kubernetes works. You could see their documentation, and you could start their this documentation is very good. I have gone through this documentation, and it gives you an idea how you need to start with Kubernetes. And yeah, you could use Kubernetes, and there are a lot of plugin also for Kubernetes that you could check it out. Next, you got an idea. Now let us look at some old OGs of open source. So one of the companies that is doing real work in open source is Meta. So if you know Llama, if you are in AI space, you might be knowing Olama, which Meta was has uh, publicly open source their code, so you could easily install their code and get their engine, and which have made a huge impact in AI community, because lot of company were not open source their code, especially ChatGPT and all those stuff. But here Meta came and publicly opened their code for Olama, and which is built on 3.1 billion parameters, and they are still open sourcing it till now. They have later still in this state they have launched 3.2, which is still open source. Next, you might be using React or React Native for your web development. So if you know that React is a one of the popular framework for web development, and basically it was made by Meta. And if you want to come to GitHub and search for React, you will get their repository. And here, let us go to, okay, so here we have got React framework. Here is the code for React framework, but basically it's from Vercel, which is little bit odd because Vercel has their Next.js, but React was built by Meta, and the reason why they built was because, and when they were developing their mobile application, they wanted to have like they created mobile application for Instagram, sorry, for Facebook, and for each version of Android they have their separate application, and for each model they have separate versions. So what do I mean? So if you are using, suppose you are using iPhone and I'm using Android, I'm using Samsung phone, let's say a Fold 12, and someone is using Samsung or Realme Pro. You might have different version. That's okay because you are using iOS, but um, mine Android version is Android 16, and his Android version is also Android 16. But only the model I have changed because I'm using Samsung. The other person is using BlackBerry or any other phone. And suppose it's using what Samsung, but the model is different. Suppose they are using Samsung Fold, let's say older version 10. They might be having different version of application for mobile application for Facebook, and which created lot of chaos because whenever there was an update version, you need to deploy it for lot of versions. And suppose, and this was managed by only one person in their team, in Meta team, and he was telling, like, he have created some blog about it, that he have to do all the check logs for all this application version, and for each model you could imagine how much stress work was for it. And then the guy left the Meta, and the Meta team, what they did was they totally scrapped this project, and they came with the React and React Native, which was solution to their problem, that you could easily deploy your web application. It was a cross multi-platform deployment, so you could easily deploy to Android, to Kotlin, sorry, to iOS, and then to web development. And but if you think, I have a separate thinking, if you want to develop cross multi-platform development, I think it's best to go to the native software development. So if you are in web development, you could use React because it uses HTML, CSS, JavaScript. But for developing your mobile development, I will not prefer you to use. Uh, you could use like React Native to build those on this. It basically use JavaScript for those, but in backend, what it does, it basically converts those code to the native language of the Android, which is basically Java and Kotlin. And similarly, the iOS understand only Swift language, so basically compiles your in React Native, it compiles that code into Swift C, and then it's able to run those code. But the real challenges is that whenever you want to develop some complex thing, there might be some APIs that are available in the Android one, but it might not be available in iOS. So that is challenging. And other thing is, whenever there is new development, it easily comes to the native one rather than to the React, because they need to create some kind of code to be able to support into the iOS and Android version. Whereas in native development, which is for if you want to build on Android, you have Android Studio IDE, and on the top of you could use coding languages as Java and Kotlin. And then for iOS, you need to know about Swift, which uses Objective C to build on the this. But whenever there is new update on those, like some new API or some new functionality come and you want to use on those phone, so these native tools are very much helpful to build upon. Now let's look at some next OG, that is Linux. So why Linux is famous? Because of Linux, a lot of open source development have been done. So if you're not if you are saying I don't use Linux, you might don't know that your phone, if you are using Android phone, it's built upon Linux hardware, Linux software. So you have Linux, and then on the top of your code, your Android version is running on. So if you are very curious, you could go to some settings and you could find those bunch of Linux files. So then you could imagine that how many device Linux is running on. So every device is is built upon Android. Sorry, built upon Android is already built upon Linux. Your Wi-Fi is built upon Linux, so it uses Linux to run. And if you are thinking, okay, now what's next? So your all other servers are uses Linux, which is very if you want to deploy any software or any your code. Suppose you want to deploy onto Amazon, sorry, Amazon Web Service or some other web service like Google, Google or like Google Cloud or Microsoft Azure. One of the popular choices for the server is Linux-based server. You might use Ubuntu, you might use Linux, which is all these are open source, and this is one thing. Next, if you remember about Kubernetes, right? They use Docker for it's a handling K8 clusters. It's a clustering tool to handle Docker container. So it was already developed by Linux Foundation to build Docker. Basically, it was used to suppose you build some program and you want to ship it. But to ship it, suppose other computer or other user don't have those dependency that computer have. So basically, that's why Docker was made, so it containerized your application, and you could easily ship it to another PC. And you might have hear it some about that it is not working on my device, and some people say it's working on my device. Why? Because that was the main purpose to resolve those. That was the main purpose of Docker to resolve this. And if you want to come to GitHub, you could easily search for Linux, and I don't know like if they have those. Yeah, so if you look at Linux kernel tree, so it's kernel source tree, and here you could see the maintainer is Torvalds, who is the basically developer for Linux and Git. And if you know Git, it's already used by every, it's industry standard to deploy and software management for your product. It's open source. GitHub uses Git. Every other person uses Git, and it's very helpful for your software manager management lifecycle. So Torvalds was one of the developer that built Linux. He built Git, and here you could see his commitment, like commit lifecycle. We have developing it for years. And if you go to Linux, here is your code. You could see the number of stars. It's 180k plus, and you know why it's 180k plus, because everyone uses Git. And everyone uses Linux, and there are a lot of uh, version of Linux, like distribution of Linux, that is Ubuntu. So one is Ubuntu. You would search for Ubuntu. So here you get Ubuntu files. Then you have Fedora, which is basically also built upon Linux. You, then you have Fedora, and then you have Debian base. Lot of kernel source, open source software to build upon. Now we have got a lot of idea. Now let us look at uh, these two tools, these two last tools. So you might be wondering what is this R and what is this TF. Logo is in two perspective view. So basically, this is the first one is Rust, and it's gaining a lot of development in blockchain industry. Why? Because of its memory handling, and there is no like it is used to easily handle memory overflow garbage, so you don't have their condition in C. Like if you use C, you know you could easily uh, go to the memory overflow. You could easily overflow in C, memory overflow in C. Why? Because suppose you initiated a memory in C, which is addressing some to address, and then you deleted that address, but that reference would be there. And when compiler runs, it will try to reference to that address, but that address won't exist. So the compiler would still compile, and when you run in production, it will fail very miserably. So to overcome this issue, and this issue is memory $1 billion issue. This happens in a lot of industries. So basically, you think in Android, this could easily happen. So you are trying to reference some variable, but that variable is already dereferenced and it's no longer exist, and your application would easily corrupt out. So that was the reason Rust is basically gaining very much attraction. It's of memory safe, and lot of compilers now are going to be written in Rust. Why? Because whenever it was built upon C, which is very useful. When you built upon assembly language, you could easily communicate with hard drive, but there was challenge. You could have a lot of not too much of memory reference, and that's why Rust was made. It's used for memory reference. You could like safety. You have safe memory. So basically, uh, what happen is once the memory once the variable is dereferenced, its reference is gone, so you cannot able to access that reference. Only one variable is able to have those reference. So you cannot reference one variable to another and then you could delete. Only one variable have that reference, so you don't need to know about that too much. But basically that is the reason why Rust is gaining popularity. And if we check to go to the Rust, so here is the Rust open source code, and you could see it's built upon its own language Rust, and some of other languages also used. So the reason why is fast and memory efficient, and the memory efficient is very big reason because you are able to get those binary in small files, and which is why that is the reason. Because of its memory safety, it's also uses in embedded device. So if you remember, if you use any smartwatch or any other tools, embedded device like Arduino or those things, you could try to use Rust. Basically, if you remember, if you are using smartwatch or Fitbit band, it might probably be written in CLang, and the issue with CLang, and that's why people are now moving to Rust. Next is the main reason is ownership, because only one variable could have the ownership of their variable. Once it's dereferenced, it's removed from their uh, the memory is dereferenced, and then you could not able to access that memory. Thread safety, reducing bugs and compile times. At the compile time, it's all it's a very good practice to get all the errors at compile times than to the run times, because if it's coming at run time, you might not able to get those errors that what is happening. So in Rust, all the errors you will be able to get at the compile time. Next, you they have comprehensive documentation for each package. You could go to their documentation and have an idea how it does. Basically, they use Cargo for package management, and Rust FMT for auto formatting. Lintering, it's used for Clipper, and Rust Analyzer for analyzing your code if there is any error before compile time. And for Python, it's pip, and for Node, for Node it is Node Package Manager, (NPM). Now you have got an idea. Okay, what is Rust is. Now let us look at the TensorFlow. And if you want to look at the number of stars, it's 97.4K, half of Linux. So let us look at the next open source tool, that is TensorFlow. And if you are from AI, you might already know what is TensorFlow is. Basically, it's an open source framework for machine learning where you train your machine learning models. Uh, Basically, for uh, open source model, basically you train lot of data onto it, and you could create model out of it. And here it's built upon C++ and Python. So here you could see TensorFlow is an end-to-end open source platform for machine learning, and it has a lot of flexible ecosystem, state of the art in ML, and developers easily build and deploy ML powered application. It was built by Google. TensorFlow was originally developed and researched within the machine intelligence team at Google Brain to conduct research in machine learning and neural networks. However, the framework is very versatile that you could use any other as well. So once you want to use machine learning, you don't want to use write whole thing from scratch. You don't want to write equation in linear. Uh, so suppose if you are using a linear model, you don't want to write your equation ax plus bx plus c and then create all the two equation and then fit your model onto it, train your model onto it, and do that. Basically, TensorFlow already have those inbuilt libraries. You don't want to write a convolutional neural net equation to solve those, because it will be out of our reach, because it's very tough. And basically TensorFlow already have those libraries, so why not use that? So that's why TensorFlow provides Python and C++ API, and as well as non-guaranteed backward compatible API for other languages. So it suppose other languages it, but they do not provide any compatible guarantee to it. And here you could see number of stars, 186, leading the way. I think is the highest one, and it's maintained, and it's highly used in machine learning. And here you could see their latest version. Now you have got an idea about lot of some cool GitHub repos and tools. Now it's time to learn about how you could contribute to one of these open source tools.